Can a single pilot change the fate of an entire team? What did Lewis Hamilton find in the SF-25 that no one else had noticed and that could now rewrite the entire Ferrari narrative in 2025? Lewis Hamilton did not get to Ferrari looking for a last quiet chapter in his career. He arrived with a clear vision: redeem one of the most iconic racks of motor racing, return it to the top, and above all, leave a technical and competitive mark that transcends its legacy. From the first day it went up to SF-25, it was clear that this was not going to be a simple adaptation process, but a true surgical exercise of detection and correction of failures. Hamilton not only drove the car, undressed him. He felt it, challenged him, and questioned him back after return. And that changed everything. The first symptom appeared in a critical area for any car in the hybrid era: the energy recovery braking system. What in Mercedes was a surgical precision tool, in Ferrari it became a component that interferes with its natural piloting style. Specifically, the retention of the key engine in the regenerative deceleration was abrupt, invasive. Hamilton met a car that did not allow him to stop with the aggressiveness or confidence that had made him a legend. This anomalous behavior completely altered mass transfer during braking, forcing a constant readjustment of vehicle balance. The disconnection between pilot and machine was not limited to mere discomfort. It was a deep technical gap. To compensate, Hamilton turned to maneuvers that he had never needed in his career, such as overloading the rear brakes to help the car rotate and curve. This technique, although effective in the short term, generated a new problem: the overheating of the rear rubber. Every time he tried to win a few tenths forcing that rotation, he compromised the thermal integrity of the tire. This, in practical terms, meant entering a negative cycle in which each attempt of improvement led to a greater global deterioration of the car. The impact of this mismatch was not just a technician, also psychological. Hamilton, known for his mental domain, had to face the frustration of feeling that the car did not return what he gave him. Where other pilots could have accepted that condition as an immovable limit, Hamilton saw an opportunity to diagnose, intervene, and transform. The remarkable thing is that his observations, often made only with the sensitivity of his hands and his body, ended up being validated by Ferrari engineers after hours of telemetria's review. That ability to detect what the sensors do not always capture, to feel what the data takes to reveal, made it the most sophisticated instrument of the team. For Ferrari, having Hamilton was not just having a champion, it was incorporating a technical diagnostic accelerator. And although the solutions are still far from completing, the simple fact of having identified with such precision where the weak points of the SF-25 were, in itself, one of the greatest contributions that Hamilton made to Maranello in just some races. The word subviring might seem one more technicality within the complex universe of Formula One, but for engineers and pilots it represents one of the most devastating ills that a car can suffer. In the case of SF-25, this problem not only exists, but has become a chronic obstacle that drastically limits its competitiveness. And Lewis Hamilton has been, once again, the first to notice the real magnitude of this failure. We are not talking about a slight loss of adhesion at the curve entrance. It is a structural condition that is completely sabotaging the aggressiveness of driving and, what is worse, destroying front tires in alarmingly prematurely. The most obvious case was presented at the Granbia of Saudi Arab. There, Hamilton described the behavior of the car as mass subviring. Under career conditions with hard tires, he losing up to 1.2 seconds per round in front of his partner Charles Leclerc. This differential is not a simple matter of pilot style. It is the tangible manifestation of an aerodynamic load imbalance that breaks the symmetry of the car. When the front axle loses response capacity, the pilot is forced to enter the curve slower, to make constant corrections and, consequently, to raise the internal temperatures of the tire to the point of collapse. The origin of this problem is not in a single component. Ferrari tried, before the start of the season, introduce a series of aerodynamic improvements in the car, especially in the Venturi channel area and the rear diffuser. The intention was clear: to gain load in the posterior axis and improve the passage by curve. However, what seemed a logical evolution ended up destabilizing the general balance of the car. The pressure center moved dangerously forward, altering the dynamic balance and causing a disconnection between the response of the front axle and that of the rear. This generated an erratic behavior that, in practice, prevents the pilot from anticipating the reaction of the car at the entrance and half of the curve. The most dramatic is the effect that this defect generates on tire management. The SF-25 literally devours the front compounds. The tire surface suffers excessive friction due to the forced angle of rotation and the lack of natural adhesion. This generates blistering and graining at abnormally early speeds in the stint, which forces teams to modify career strategies and even sacrifice competitive turns to preserve some rubber. In a category where the control of wear is key to success, this technical failure makes the car a constant risk for any pilot that leads to the limit. In addition, this accelerated wear pattern not only reduces return to return, but also conditions the entire weekend planning. The workload in simulators, the setup, the tests and free training, everything now revolves around a problem that should not exist first. And this is where Hamilton becomes even more relevant. Its ability to translate sensations into data, to accurately identify the moments in which the tire loses efficiency, has allowed Ferrari to adjust certain parameters, but without being able to solve the original cause at the root. The most worrying thing is that, without a radical intervention in the aerodynamic concept of the SF-25, the problem of subwiring and the consumption of tires will continue to be a constant. And while McLaren, Red Bull and Mercedes work in evolving their cars, Ferrari continues to be trapped in a dilemma. Each attempt to improve seems to bring new complications. The car is not a docile tool, it is an unbalanced artifact that punishes the pilot for wanting to take it to the limit. And in that daily struggle against the car itself, it is where Hamilton, with all his experience, is beginning to show a virtue that goes beyond speed, the ability to identify structural failures before they become irreversible failures. Within the technical analysis of a Formula One car, there are aspects that sensors can quantify with millimeter precision: side force, suspension compression, telemetry data. However, there is an even more sophisticated level of diagnosis, the one that is based on the sensitivity of the pilot, on the trained intuition that allows us to interpret what technology barely hints. And that is exactly what Lewis Hamilton did when he detected structural instability on the rear axle of the SF-25, a problem as subtle as devastating that it was affecting the behavior of the car in multiple dynamic conditions without anyone in Ferrari having clearly noticed it. The alarm went on during free training in Monaco. In an urban circuit where each curve demands absolute precision, Hamilton felt that something did not square. Every time the car entered a slow curve typical of the Monegasque streets, it behaved erratically. Sometimes I lost traction without warning, sometimes it seemed excessive when leaving curve. For a pilot without Hamilton's degree of sensitivity, that could have happened as a simple detail of tuning. But it was not so. Hamilton not only reported the problem, but sat with his engineers, reviewed the return data, and discovered a pattern that no one else had noticed. The SF-25 did not uniform the aerodynamic load along the rear axle. The car concentrated efforts in specific structural areas, which generated unstable behavior under variable load conditions. Under ideal conditions, a Formula One car must behave as an extension of the pilot's body, delivering consistent sensations and predictable reactions in both acceleration and braking or change of direction. What Hamilton discovered is that SF-25 broke with that logic. While other monoplays maintained a progressive response thanks to an aerodynamic load symmetrically distributed through the diffuser and the rear suspension, the Ferrari showed areas of rigidity and others of excessive flexibility, a phenomenon that generates breakpoints in the dynamics of the car. In practical language, the car could seem balanced in a high-speed curve, but completely unpredictable in a chicana or slow curve. This implies very serious consequences for the competitiveness of the car. First, it compromises traction in curve outputs, which translates into loss of time and greater stress on rear tires. Second, it forces pilots to handle with a much greater safety margin, which directly affects their ability to squeeze the car's performance. And third, it raises a monumental challenge in terms of technical development, because the cause of this instability is not in a single isolated component, but in the interaction between several elements. The stiffness of the chassis, the geometry of the suspension, the mapping of the aerodynamic load, and even the internal design of the impact absorption structures. The most critical thing is that this condition is not constantly manifested, which further complicates its diagnosis. It appears in specific conditions, when the car changes sharply between acceleration and braking, or when it passes from one curve to another with rapid lateral load transfers. This variability makes the pilot guess how the car will respond in each situation, which is unacceptable at the highest level of motoring. And that is where Hamilton's intervention takes on an incalculable value. He managed to identify an invisible pattern, draw a line between the subjective behavior of the car and the objective data of the acquisition system. Ferrari, thanks to these observations, began a comprehensive review of the SF-25 design. But as usually happens in F1, structural changes cannot be implemented overnight. It is required to redesign fundamental parts of the car, which implies time, simulations, impact tests, and technical validations. Meanwhile, the team must live with that instability, adapt setup strategies, and trust the ability of its pilots to mitigate their effects. In that scenario, having Hamilton is not just an advantage, it is a necessity. The case of Lewis Hamilton in Ferrari, and its brutal diagnosis of the SF-25, is not simply one more chapter in the modern history of Formula One. It is a mirror that reflects many of the structural tensions that affect large teams when they face the pressure of the legacy, the expectation of fans, and the emergency for immediate results. Hamilton is not just trying to win races. He is trying to rebuild, from within, a culture of technical precision and responsibility that Ferrari has lost at times in the last decade. The most impressive thing about his role in this story is the clarity with which he has exhibited a series of technical deficiencies that, without their presence, could have gone unnoticed or have been justified as simple seasonal start adjustments. But they weren't. They were identified, confronted, and exposed with rawness. From the aggressive management of the regenerative braking, to the destructive combination of subverming and degradation, through the instability of the rear axle, the SF-25 has undergone a clinical dissection by one of the most technical and analytical pilots of its generation. Therefore, what has been leaked is not simply technical information. It is an unquestionable truth about Ferrari's reality in 2025. His car is not up to the talent that leads it. And this disconnection between ambition and execution is what is determining the immediate future of the team. Because if Ferrari wants Hamilton era to be more than a glorious anecdote, he must listen, adjust, evolve, and above all, learn. Now the question remains on the table. Will Ferrari able to transform these revelations into solutions? Or are we facing a scenario where not even the talent of a 7-time world champion can reverse the inertia of a technical giant who still does not find his north?